Hi, welcome to the DRH show where I have wide-ranging conversations with interesting people. We talk about all things psychology, mental health, and wellness. Now, lockdown, which is still going on, has transformed our lives and the way we do things. That is especially true within the world of psychotherapy. So joining me today to flesh out the challenges that surrounds digital therapy are the team from Kuva. Kuva offers a comprehensive remote working solution without exploiting your client's data profit. So we will hear it today from Alex Hogan, who is the CEO of Kuva. And we also have Beth, who is the customer service manager. And alongside Beth, we also have Stephanie, who is also the customer service manager. Welcome here to the DRH show, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. This is really an important topic. Like what I've said, the way that we do things, be it in psychotherapy or otherwise, it has transformed. It has transformed a lot, and because of that, we have to, we have to put things in order when it comes to assisting clients. So if you could just explain to us what Kuva is and who is it for. I think the best person to describe this would be Alex, the CEO.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having us this afternoon. So Kuva was a project that came out of a couple of year-long study into applying AI or digital technologies to the charitable legal sector. As part of that study, we were trying to look at technologies that we believe could have systemic impact on the way that it operated, and without being too serious, we managed to discover that the ways in which the integrity of data and the security of the interactions that people were having were certainly somewhat compromised. But I think, not meaning to be accusatorial at all, could certainly be improved in the way that it both afforded relationships that happened offline or in the real world to happen online, and enabled the kind of work that needed to be done on the scale it needed to be done. And then we discovered, after starting to specify a communications platform that would be able to do that, the much of what we discovered rolled over into, say, the therapeutic sector, your own area of interest, as well as other places where people who might offer face-to-face professional services would want to have a level of remove from a digital infrastructure that probably requires some level of surveillance, either in the business model it operates or in the way in which people who are not necessarily tech savvy have to deal with it. So Six is Secure Integrated Communication Suite, and that was the project that we worked on, where we tried to specify a communications infrastructure which had privacy at its core, the implicit assumption that the relationship between a professional service giver and their client or their customer, or however you want to refer to them, was between them and them alone, and where it had to be mediated by technology, did so in order to make sure that the sanctity of the offline world was preserved as much as it could be on the online world. We set up Kuva as the business to try and bring that to people. It's a digital privacy brand which is designed to acknowledge that those interactions must happen for various reasons in the digital space, and where it does have to happen is done so with the values of security, of privacy, and of making sure that people could work together, confident that there's nobody doing anything with the information that's generated by that interaction. I don't know if my colleagues would like to offer anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to touch upon what you said earlier, Alex, that you're not being accusatory of, how data could be exploited, because we've heard it from mainstream news. If you're using Skype, you can't really rely on that the data will really be protected. And as what you've said, we really have to protect the integrity of the psychotherapeutic process. Now, I've got some specific questions with Stephanie and Beth, being the customer service manager. I suppose we just have to step back a bit. From your own experience, what would you say is the advantage and disadvantage of online therapy, but bearing in mind that we're kind of like moving now much to the online therapy? Stephanie?
Start. Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that people haven't had any choice. There was the pandemic, and in fact, the reason we developed Kuva so rapidly was as a response to the pandemic. So people were sort of faced with this situation where they had to go online, they had to privilege access over privacy, and they just had to use whatever was available. So I think, and now we're in a moment where people are considering whether they want to continue online, and there's an expectation, in fact, there's a demand to continue online, to continue to provide that level of access. So we're looking at a move to sort of merged deliveries, both online and offline services. And, some of the therapists we've spoken to say that certainly some of their clients prefer to work online. They would rather continue their sessions online than move back to in person. Other therapists say that there's an advantage for the therapeutic relationship in that it removes the physical presence of the therapist. So it's closer to the sort of Freudian model of a patient on a couch, with as little interference from the sort of physical body of the therapist, if you like, as possible. And also that young people prefer it. And one therapist I've spoken to who's been working with autistic children says that it can actually be useful in working, and some of the tools that are available online can be very useful working with autistic children who might relate more easily to, say, an avatar or a sort of a figure online than someone who's actually in a room with them.
Sorry.
But of course, there are also problems, and the problem that people are facing now is that they want to keep that relationship of trust that they have in real life therapeutic rooms, and it's becoming, I think, more and more obvious to people as we're sort of examining the post-pandemic, or in the tail end of the pandemic, we're examining more about how these relationships online are affecting and the sort of consequences of using online platforms.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. I just want to direct a more specific question to relation to that. I suppose, Beth, do you see Kuva and other online platforms or online therapy in general as more of a fad? Because obviously we're in lockdown now, so you have really a good case for using online therapy. But how do you compromise things such as, we're trying to decrease screen time for other people, because obviously internet addiction is also something that we have to be concerned about.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, it's a question we'd be thinking about. Obviously, seeing stocks of Zoom go down, but I don't think that's anything really to do with less usage, especially in remote working. Remote working, from our studies, is very much here to stay. And one thing that's affecting that isn't the pandemic is supply and demand for therapy. So, for example, we've got a concentration of need in the south, and we've got a number of practitioners in the north who are coming together and saying, we have room to take up this demand. And the answer to that, of course, is going to be remote therapy. It's not going to be physically moving people around for these appointments, but normalising the use of online therapy. And that's where we come in to really replicate that real life experience where we know that the demand really isn't going to go away. And it also means that we can help alleviate the burden on public health, etc., and especially with people having extra needs from the pandemic, from their experience of the pandemic. We do believe that it's going to be more usage of remote working in this field than less.
I wonder if I could add something
Sure.
at the end of that, just to respond to your question of whether it's a fad. I'm currently living in Paris. I'm part of the expat community here, and I actually know several people who have found therapists in the United Kingdom to speak to. I think mostly, the pandemic has put a lot of people under stress. I'm not sure if they would have necessarily been looking before, but one of the things that certainly marks myself and my friends out is that we're not particularly confident in our French, and certainly wouldn't want to do something like this in a language that isn't our first one. And the people I know have managed to find therapists in the United Kingdom, something which rather than being a fad, I don't think could have happened were technology such as this to be able to enable it. And I don't think it would necessarily be demand that would be met by being able to see somebody offline, even if you could find somebody who's a relatively confident English speaker who would talk to you in Paris. The actual act of finding that person, trying to set that up, is probably an energy block that would make it an intractable problem for certainly some of the people that I know. So as opposed to being a fad, I think it's actually afforded opportunities to look after themselves that weren't necessarily there, had technology not been able to enable it.
Absolutely. And well, already there, Alex, I just want you to address the points that you already alluded to earlier. You're kind of mentioning why we should be more, wary about using free platforms such as Skype or Zoom. Why should we consider, if you're a psychotherapist, why should we consider Kuva or other digital platforms when it comes to online psychotherapy?
So to clarify, is the question why I think people might want to avoid free ones? I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything that is heard before. The adage that it being free at the point of use doesn't necessarily mean that it's free. Certainly, the business models of some of the major players in digital services are such that being able to monetize attention or access to information about how you use it is how they intend to make money. It might be a point of disagreement with your audience, but one of the motivations we had is, I think, a belief that there's a moral compulsion in certain of the interactions that we are trying to facilitate to not invite other people to exploit that for commercial advantage. I'm not suggesting that it's the primary reason that those interactions would happen, but I do think that if you're using certain of the free and widely available platforms, you are opening yourself up to that in a way that I personally don't think is acceptable, and that's a personal judgment of mine. But if that's in any way congruent with other people's values, I think that the option to not have that at the core of your professional interactions should be there, and that's what Kuva hopes to serve.
I could really go along with that. I suppose this is a bit off tangent when you said that there's nothing really free, because I'm an online content creator, so there are expenses involved with running a website and also uploading videos on YouTube. There are a lot of expenses involved in that, and just like what you've said, we have to monetize it in one way or another just to cover for the cost. But I suppose what I'd like to hear from you is that, of course, these mainstream platforms like Skype and Zoom, and they're offering a free service, and so they have to kind of monetize it to sustain the service that they're offering. But why should we care, whether as a psychotherapist or as a client, why should we care about digital privacy? So what if they know the content of the call? So what? Would you like to address that, Beth?
Absolutely. The biggest concern for me is the therapeutic alliance, as we've just alluded to. When you are entering into a conversation with your clients, you are making that promise to them. Now, if you aren't letting your client know when they're entering a Zoom call that if they've chosen to enter using a social media platform, or if they've chosen to contact you with a Gmail email, if you're not letting them know at that point that they're not as safe as they could be, I really do question whether you're breaking that therapeutic alliance. And it really does start there. So once you've crossed that point, you are exposing, it might be minimal data, location, times, but you are choosing to expose your patients to that. You're choosing to advertise your client, if you will. And it's really about letting people know when they are using these social media platforms, the platforms that they're using, the proprietary platforms, they're not for therapy, they were social tools. So that if you're not using something purpose-built in the sector, chances are you are leaking your client's data. And that, sorry, Alex.
Oh no, I agree. I think that there's a level removed from moral blackmail as well. I think I would question, and it's just from a place of ignorance. Perhaps it's something that your viewers would be able to teach us. But is the therapeutic relationship the same if you have a suspicion that there's somebody listening in? You know, like if you were sitting in a room speaking to somebody about something intimate and had some level of acknowledgement that there was a two-way mirror with someone on the other side of it who intended to commercialize what they were discovering from you, would you be having the same relationship? Is it the same session as one where that isn't taking place? Like I say, I'm speaking from a place of ignorance, but my gut feeling is I wouldn't treat that conversation in the same way. And this is, again, I wish to clarify, this isn't about moral blackmail. There are questions arriving every day. You know, the terms of service change for WhatsApp, the data breaches of Zoom, the ways in which Facebook has been acting egregiously. That's some way or another entering public consciousness, and again, to some level or other. Now, if that's there, if there is that expectation that digital platforms are at least capable of doing that, is that affecting the relationship that you have before anything is ever said? Again, Kuva believes that it does, and is trying to offer you a way in which you can secure, as we say, your online world in such a way that you would want to secure your offline one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and I think that we really actually take our cues from the therapists themselves here. I mean, you know, the therapist professionalism and professional ethics are what drive Kuva. We know that therapists prioritize in real life privacy, and that the importance of the therapeutic space being completely private is utmost. And and so therapists don't really know about digital platforms. You know, they're not technological privacy experts, and why would they be? So we're working with therapists as well to help provide that for them. I mean, I suppose the other thing to add is that many therapists are sole practitioners, and as such, they're personally liable. So they have a very real, personal stake in getting it right.
Absolutely. And I just want you to answer this, because you're offering an alternative to proprietary platforms such as Skype and Zoom. But would you have the same level of feature? Let's say, for instance, where do you store your data, and how can you prevent leakage of data? Do you have those features?
So, I mean, it's a hard question to answer because it depends on what we're trying to do. The first answer I'd like to offer is that where possible, we try not to generate the data in the first place. That obviously seems to us to be one of the best defenses against the idea that it would disappear. Secondly, what we're trying to do is develop a feature roadmap to make sure that there's nothing egregiously missing from what you need to be capable of doing online, but built from the perspective that making sure that either kind of terminal catastrophe of having your data stolen or otherwise infringed upon can be avoided because it's built in some way that's robust. As I say, first principle would be don't create the data if you don't need it. So we have a feature wish list that's being built on top of a privacy preserving infrastructure. So I think waiting rooms, whiteboarding, that kind of thing, that's all coming. In fact, some of it's already in the platform. But it can't be there unless it meets our first test, which is that it's not going to open up a liability to something about that interaction being made available to a third party. I think the place to highlight is, we have had some pushback on the idea that there should be more than 3 people available to have a conference call. So we couldn't do what we're doing here with 4 of us on Kuva. And now the reason for that is in order to ensure that there's end-to-end encryption, that you have to account for the fact that there'll be latency issues as you add more people in, as opposed to operating through a server that's able to send a signal to the different clients. So we've taken a decision there. At the moment, 3 is the maximum number of people who can be on a Kuva call, and that's because if you had 4, it wouldn't be private. We couldn't afford the technical infrastructure, as far as we know, nobody could, to have a conference. And also, once you get to a large enough group of people, the notion of privacy, I think, becomes redundant because you can't control what everybody else is doing there's too many moving parts. So there's a trade-off, certainly. But to go back to your original question, what we're trying to do is center the fact that if data has to be created, it's done so in a way that the ownership of the responsibility for that is clear and managed. And where possible, we don't create that data in the first place, because our business model doesn't rely on the idea that we can exploit it. And our understanding is that that's true of our customers as well.
Would you like to add anything on that, Stephanie and Beth? I suppose you could also mention what other features that you have that you would consider in the future.
Yeah, so we'd really like to have a virtual receptionist, and the reception area that, in fact, Alex mentioned, to be able to put information in that area to make it like a real waiting area, to put relevant, pertinent information to the particular client, even to really customize it, make it your own space. We also, Beth, what else have we got coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. To be fair, there's limitless possibilities, because we're working with you guys, with the sector, and of course, you know, it's really important that we make sure that any of these items on the roadmap are with you. If anybody does want to get in contact with them, make a suggestion, can I just say, please do. It happens because you let us know what we need. And a couple of things, if I can just touch on a couple that are just starting to pop up as we're getting more used to using this software in online, and not. I was post-pandemic, but I can't. But as we're trying to get back to some sense of normality, one thing is talking over each other. We're obviously finding that thing on Zoom calls where you are just accidentally interrupting. So that's one thing that we'd like to take a look at. Again, lighting. It can be an issue in terms of making sure that everybody is treated equally in a conversation. And we want to make sure that everybody doesn't matter. Any skin tone, for example, eye colour, we want to be able to make sure that everybody is comfortable and well lit, so they don't have to think about best lighting when they're having their a consultation. They can concentrate on actually talking to their therapist and not how they're being seen. And eye contact as well. I mean, we want to make sure that if it's something that is important to have in a real life situation, in a real life session with a therapist, but we look at ways to replicate that as well. How best to get that human connection, even though we are online. So things in that area, elements that make it more like the real life experience, we're really interested in experimenting with. And that includes language, for example. And again, any access issues we might come across, and we're also looking to address those as well.
Yeah, it's probably...
Sorry.
I was going to say, it's probably worth mentioning that we're also working with, with psychological academic partners to think about the psychology of online spaces and how we can improve that.
Mm-hmm. That is really wonderful to hear that you're getting some evidence base to support the development of your platform, and I'm excited to hear how you would incorporate that with future developments of Kuva. Well, I was just about to say, this is just a little comment with what Beth said, because sometimes we overtalk on Zoom. Also, another thing that I noticed in Zoom is that we're always looking for that invisible mute button. So if you could just make it more visible with your platform, maybe that will be helpful to your you're taking note of that. That will be helpful to your clients. Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say that this is just a bit of a petty question, but where did you get the Kuva from? I know it sounds cute, but every time you launch a startup company, I know that from experience, you would have to explain where did you get that name from. Perhaps Alex can explain this.
So naming things is the hardest thing you can do. It's constantly the roadblock for anything that we're working on. It's funny that you asked me, because my process in this was to ask Beth. I was in this room and I got a PDF with some options that Beth had researched, and she asked me to help choose the best one of those. But I think, Beth, it's your answer, isn't it?
Sure. It does mean to dream in Finnish. It does also get used for mirroring or two-way glass. So it really alluded to me to what we were doing. But then we've been working with Swedish partners recently who also tell us that it means to go in waves, which is also quite poetic.
So really, serendipitous. We called it Kuva because now it seems like it's a really good choice.
Yeah. Well, the name of your company is more convincing than mine. I couldn't come up with with a more sensible explanation why I came up with Psychbridge. But anyhow, I suppose I just want to. It's not kind of like scaremongering, but I just want to make the audience of this interview realize how how serious digital privacy is and what we should take it seriously. From your experience, any one of you, could you just identify some examples how data can be exploited? I know it could be very obvious to some people, but from like what Alice has said, from place of ignorance, some people might not be aware how their actual data is exploited. Do you have any specific examples?
I think, by the way, there's an echo that. Okay, so I think the one that stands out for me is a friend of mine who told his therapist that he felt like he needed a holiday, and just happened to receive an email from eBay a few minutes later telling him if he was planning on going on holiday, he might want to buy, I don't know, beach accessories or something. And he phoned me up really freaked out about that. I would point out that, by the way, I don't believe that his telling his therapist was overheard by somebody who sold that to eBay. What I believe actually happened is that his use of the internet and the way in which he interacted with various things on it allowed somebody to profile him as somebody who was seriously considering a holiday, if not should, and thus represented a potential sales channel for somebody selling something to do with holidays. Now, I think some people might say, yeah, okay, if he's not actually been overheard, that's not particularly scary. But for me, I think it is. I think the fact that in this case, it took a bit of self-searching to be able to identify his exhaustion and then to be able to talk about it. But an algorithm was able to process that from the same data that, the website has been on, the things he bought, whatever it is. Then I think that does mark out that things are known about you and perhaps open to interpretation, but to my mind, used against you, commercialized for somebody else's benefit. On this case, the basis of someone's stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Even politicians, even Matt Hancock, it was a recording was used against him. So, like what you said, what assurance that a therapeutic conversation could not be used against you? Yeah, very good point. Do you want to add anything on that, Stephanie or Beth?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the recording of the conversation, of course, we know that a lot of proprietary platforms, I mean, they all have very long and very different privacy policies, which change regularly. But certainly, most of them reserve the right, for example, when they record a conversation, to keep it for a usually unspecified amount of time, and to something that really concerns some of the therapists we've spoken to, that it could be used in legal proceedings, which is a complete breach of the therapeutic contract in many people's eyes.
And third-party relationships, or the possibility that the people that generate it and first own it might be sold on, and that those assets become the property of somebody that was never mentioned in the relationship when somebody started using it. That happened while we were building Kuva, by the way. There was a particular provider of video chat features who we had considered working with at some point, who were bought out, and it activated third-party relationships and thus access to data about what conversations were happening. It was a big no-no to us. And the threat of that's there. If the data is generated and it's owned, then the possibility that somebody might buy it, or that a third-party relationship that wasn't put front and centre might make you realize it's there. That's
Do you want to add anything on that, Beth?
Yeah, I think imagine it like it's like taking out a local advert to tell members of the public that your client's having therapy by using these proprietary platforms, and you wouldn't do that. And I think that for a lot of our consulting psychiatrists, what's worse than being listened to is the presumption of what your client will do. Now, these it isn't people who are taking this data and packaging it up to be sold. It's done automatically, and so that the robot, if you will, can't differentiate between somebody who's needing therapy and a person who they're just selling. So when they're packaging your client for having seen you, the therapist, it's much more of a concern than being listened into. The idea that this robot could assume what your client is going to do next and encourage them to do that. You can only imagine the kind of opens you up to.
Yeah, thank you. We're already nearing towards the end of the interview, and I just have a very generic question to all of you. For anyone who's interested to explore more about digital privacy and psychotherapy, do you have any resources or recommendations, TED Talk, or perhaps anything? Do you have resources on your website where people can learn more about this stuff?
Sorry, yeah, absolutely. So we threw a webinar last week on Wednesday, the Experts Guide to Digital Therapy for Therapists, digital work therapists, sorry, and we will be doing another run of that webinar. We'll be advertising that on our LinkedIn and our website. Now, from that, we've also put together a package of advice and from the Q&A at the webinar and from talking to therapists, and that will be available on our website, kuva.org.uk, and again on our social media platforms. But again, we are advice providers. If people want to get in touch with us, they've got specific questions, they've tried to talk to umbrella organisations, for example, come and chat to us. Click on talk to us on the website and ask any questions you want.
Yeah. And also, I just want to add on that I actually came across your platform through Tom Aldridge, and he wrote a guest post on PsychReg. So what I'll do is I'll put all those links, link to your website and link to the article that Tom Aldridge wrote for PsychReg. So for anyone who just want to get to know more your company a bit more, they would have a good starting point. And I just want to finish this with a very light question. If any one of you is not working for Kuva, not working for a digital platform, what do you think you would have been doing? Let's hear it first from Alex.
I'm assuming that they were doing fantasy. I would be playing up front for Wolverhampton Wanderers.
Okay, Beth?
I would play heavy metal cello.
And Stephanie?
Oh, I would be developing a role-playing game about underwater environments.
And it's still digital. It's a pleasure having you here on the DRH show, the Kuva team, but unfortunately we ran out of time, and I look forward to hearing more about your work. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.